Hello.
Welcome back to the Space Gulag. Today we'll find out what happened had Anakin joined Dooku. Before we begin, special thanks to all of our patrons. The next episode of our miniseries comes out this Saturday. Our story begins on the planet Geonosis, during the first battle of the Clone Wars. During the battle, 2 Jedi Knights broke off from the main combat, chasing down Count Dooku in an attempt to end the war before it could even begin. The Battle of Geonosis was already a bloody mess. Clone troopers and droid forces threw all their forces at each other in an attempt to become victorious, but it was a slaughterfest. The clones were proving to lead themselves into victory though. Though for the 2 Jedi, they lost one of their friends when the ship was hit with blaster fire and Padme Amidala fell out of the vessel. Upon landing on the bay platform where Count Dooku was, the 2 Jedi ran in just before their LAAT was blown up behind them. Obi-Wan and Anakin stopped as Dooku turned his attention towards the 2 Jedi. Dooku had failed convincing Obi-Wan earlier, but maybe he could convince Skywalker. After all, Dooku knew what the long-term plan was. If he could beat Sidious to Skywalker, then he could technically be replaced. Obviously, Skywalker was meant to be Dooku's replacement, so he was going to jump the gun on it. Dooku allowed the Jedi to say what they wanted to say before the real battle began. This time, Anakin was wise enough to listen to Kenobi, so instead of running in like a maniac, he paced himself with his master. The 2 Jedi moved in, working as a duo. They had done this same exercise several times before. Obi-Wan and Anakin sparred with several other Jedi Masters in 2v1 scenarios. Their favorite competitor, Imogen D, always beat them, but he made them better because he beat them. Obi-Wan and Anakin used their same strategy here. Obi-Wan, being a strong user of Form 3, would take a majority of the blows, while Anakin, the more aggressive, would use Obi-Wan's defense to his advantage. Though the only downside to this is that Dooku was one of the best duelists of this entire era. When he was a Jedi, he was at the top of his game in the Jedi Order, and only a select few were able to ever beat him. Most of the time between the most talented Jedi in the Order, Dooku would split 50-50. This would be with masters like Plo Koon, Windu, and Depa Billaba. Though as for Jedi he couldn't beat, that was exclusively Master Yoda. Dooku was incredibly talented, and as he allowed the dark side to leech off of him, he became more powerful as a duelist, one that was nearly unstoppable, even by the likes of Sidious. So, 2 young Jedi were certainly not a challenge for someone like Dooku, though Dooku was going to use his experience to his advantage, and what he would do is take Obi-Wan out of the fight so that he could change Skywalker to his side. Obi-Wan took the lead, keeping his apprentice safe, and before Obi-Wan knew it, he was laying on the ground with a cut on his arm and in his leg. But instead of just falling, Dooku used the Force and threw Obi-Wan across the room into a wall, knocking the Jedi Master out. Skywalker got angry and pushed forward against Dooku. The skilled duelist parried every strike and didn't hesitate to apply pressure on the Skywalker as he said to him,
Skywalker, what if I told you that the Republic was under the control of the Sith?
Then I'd believe you were a fool.
Don't be arrogant, Skywalker. It's the truth. Where do you think this clone army came from? The Sith control everything.
How could that be?
The dark side is more powerful than you believe. Trust me, I too was once a Jedi, and they held me back from my true power.
I can't just leave the Jedi Order.
You can and you will. You have so much more potential than the Jedi can give you. Even your master was holding you back from your true power.
No, this isn't right. I can't do this.
Join me. We can destroy the Sith. We can overthrow the Republic and establish order. That is what you want, is it not?
I want peace. There should be no need for war or slavery.
Then come with me to Sereno and I will teach you.
Anakin looked over at Obi-Wan, who laid on the ground without movement. He looked back at Dooku and then ran over to Obi-Wan's side, sheathing his lightsaber. Dooku sheathed it as he watched what Skywalker did next. Anakin checked Obi-Wan's pulse to make sure that he was still alive, and then he got up and turned to Dooku. Anakin nodded his head, and Dooku pointed Skywalker towards the Solar Sailor. When they got on the ship, it lifted off and shot past the Separatist fleet that was preparing to retreat into hyperspace from the battle. Dooku told Skywalker on the trip to Sereno that he would drop him off before heading to Coruscant because he had important business to tend to. Dooku then made sure that Anakin would follow explicit instructions. Upon their arrival to Castle Sereno, Anakin was to begin his training regiment, with the Magna Guard stationed on the castle. Anakin understood these instructions and upon his arrival, got to work. Though while he was training with the Magna Guards, his thoughts ran rampant, which forced him off of his game and made him struggle against the droid guards. See, Anakin's thoughts dwelled not just on his mother's recent death, but everything he seemingly left behind. He was curious if Obi-Wan ever got off of Geonosis or what happened to Padme. Anakin was taking a big risk here, because he just threw away his potential love with Padme to possibly save the galaxy. Or what about his friend Palpatine? Would he ever know about this, or what happened to the kid he essentially looked after like a guardian? On Geonosis, Obi-Wan was eventually awoken by Master Yoda, a group of clones, and Senator Amidala. When Obi-Wan got up, he was confused, and Yoda unfortunately knew the nature of what had happened. It seemed as if Skywalker had chosen the path of least resistance. Sure, there was more access to the Force with the dark side, but to Yoda, the path of a Jedi took strength and courage. Yoda knew that Skywalker gave in to his impatience and joined Dooku. Did it mean Anakin was no longer savable? No, but it did mean that the Jedi would have a difficult time trying to convince him to return to their ranks. Padme, on the other hand, was rather heartbroken. She'd been in relationships in the past, but she had ever since shut herself off from them, and she finally made herself vulnerable to someone, and he decided to leave her in the dust for something new and exciting. It was sad for her, and it made her close up, but it didn't stop her from helping Obi-Wan up and making sure that he was okay. When the Jedi returned to the temple, Obi-Wan wasn't granted the full rank of Master because Skywalker hadn't reached the level of Knight yet. But the Jedi Council didn't blame Obi-Wan for Skywalker deciding to join Dooku. It was out of his power at that point, more so than it being specifically Obi-Wan's fault. It was now a combination of the Order failing to help Skywalker succeed, and it took him abandoning the Order similarly to how Dooku did for the Council to see that. As the Clone Wars began, Anakin was kept out of the loop. Dooku fed him information that he wanted to hear and taught him the ways of the dark side, which for Anakin was really empowering, because Dooku wasn't a Sith. He was more so a follower and user of the dark side, because it gave him most of the power that he needed, and he was able to comfortably teach Skywalker how to use the dark side correctly. While Dooku was hard on Ventress and Grievous, he went a little lighter on Skywalker. Now this wasn't favoritism, because Dooku didn't really like Skywalker too much. He believed Anakin was arrogant, and had a crushing ego issue, something that held Anakin back as a Jedi. Though the reason Dooku was lighter on Skywalker was because Anakin's ceiling was much higher than his own, and if he went too hard, he knew that at a certain point Skywalker would be even too much for him to handle. Dooku didn't want to risk that situation unfolding, because if he did, then it would likely destroy any chance of getting rid of the Republic. Though there was something challenging for Dooku to deal with, and it was the fact that Sidious was now aware that Anakin never returned from Geonosis. The Jedi hadn't explicitly said anything about that at this point, nor had they revealed that Anakin Skywalker joined the Separatists or the Sith. It was just simply an unspoken thing. With the Clone Wars leaping into high gear, Obi-Wan Kenobi took on another apprentice at the Battle of Christophsis named Ahsoka Tano. She was a little like Anakin, but a lot more rambunctious, though Obi-Wan, having had Skywalker, would be able to adequately train Ahsoka, especially before she did something ridiculous that could get into trouble. Though Obi-Wan knew that she would be difficult, all the while he dealt with Anakin leaving the Order. Obi-Wan at Geonosis was very unaware that Anakin's mother had died, but once he returned to Coruscant, he learned what happened when Padme told him. Obi-Wan was a bit of a brute to deal with for Anakin. The two of them butted heads a lot, but it was because Obi-Wan truly believed Anakin could become the best, and he wanted Anakin to see that, to become that Jedi, he could latch on to a desire to achieve victory through power. It was Anakin's biggest weakness, and it's something that Count Dooku hadn't yet picked up on. Dooku was a great teacher, however, he hadn't realized that Anakin's crippling weakness was his inability to see that victory could be achieved through more means other than dominance. Though between Dooku and Anakin, their relationship was iffy, very reminiscent of Obi-Wan and Anakin's relationship. Dooku found Anakin a bit of a pain to deal with, and Anakin wanted to do everything and anything when he wanted because he could. But with Dooku, that wouldn't fly. Considering the two of them sparred often enough, Dooku got his anger out by beating Anakin in every spar that they had with each other. Skywalker didn't like that too much, but he couldn't do anything. He was definitely powerful while using his anger, but on the other hand, he wasn't in full control. His lack of control is where he suffered. When they weren't sparring, Dooku was forcing Anakin to use the Force in a multitude of new ways. Count Dooku would use Anakin's trauma against him, talking about his sufferings as a slave, a Jedi, and a failure of a son, to make him more used to the dark side. It made Anakin in a way resent Dooku, and continue to question if this entire thing was worth his time, because in reality, was it? Because sometimes it didn't feel like it. Being abused by your teacher was a lot harder than being cared for by your teacher, and Anakin noticed a distinct difference between Obi-Wan and Dooku. Obi-Wan did what he did because he believed Anakin could be so much more than him, caring for him by not letting him get away with slacking off and being power-obsessed, while Dooku forced Anakin to use the Force in a much deadlier way. Anakin was able to lift all the pillars outside of Castle Sereno with little difficulty, and use Force lightning like it was second nature, but the means of which he achieved these feats were what bothered him the most. Anakin didn't like using anger as much as he thought he would initially. As a Jedi, it was fun, because it was against the status quo. Using the dark side made him a powerful Jedi, because very few Jedi used it, but when it was constantly encouraged, it was draining. And even for the Chosen One, using the dark side became a draining task, though not physically. It was more of a mental task, and it took a very big toll on him. While Dooku was forcing Skywalker into a freak of nature, the war was dragging on. The Clone Wars were off to a heavy start, with the dealings of Tatooine, Tordaria, Christophsis, and Ryloth grabbing galactic attention, and the destruction of the Malevolence thanks to a group of talented clones and 2 Jedi Council members in Saesee Tiin and Plo Koon, the 2 of them being the most talented pilots left in the Jedi Order, which helped them secure the destruction of the Malevolence, where Kenobi and his students' fleet came in to reinforce the final destruction of the ship. During that fight, Ahsoka and Obi-Wan would have to sneak onto the Malevolence to save Senator Amidala, who was for some reason sent to the exact coordinates of the superweapon by the Chancellor. Not suspicious at all, is it? The training of Ahsoka was going rather well, of course, aside from a couple hiccups on Ahsoka's part. She took to Obi-Wan's mentorship rather well though. She certainly was unorthodox, but Obi-Wan had plenty of experience with that kind of student and behavior, and so it didn't really bother him while he taught his student. For Anakin, he felt a severe sense of isolation. He was kept in the dark about the entire war, for the most part, and his master was leaving him behind all the time. Anakin had very limited interactions with anyone other than the Magna Guards. Dooku had to go to Coruscant and Raxus several times. Of course, Grievous and Asajj Ventress came to the Castle Sereno to interact with Skywalker, but didn't go much further than that. Palpatine was still kept out of the loop on everything because it was all a part of the plan. Dooku had all the pieces where he wanted them, and continuously perpetuated the fact that Skywalker likely disappeared beneath Geonosis. This led Palpatine to push the Jedi into leading a second battle at Geonosis, to make sure they could save Skywalker. Yoda at which point considered mentioning that he believed Anakin left the Jedi Order, but with all the cave systems on the planet, it wasn't hard to believe that Anakin could have been abducted by the Geonosis and been held captive for many months. Though the Battle of Geonosis required much more than a regular fleet, it required the combined strength of multiple armies, fleets, and Jedi. This was a large campaign, and the Republic couldn't just pull troops away from a heavily dependent location to risk this operation. Anakin sat on Sereno while the galaxy was preparing for a second Battle of Geonosis. His mind was focused on everything around him. The Force was with him, and he was falling back onto the light, because with so much darkness coming from Ventress and Dooku, he fell back into balance, which in turn wasn't absolute light. Anakin's drawing back towards the light helped him find an easy balance inside of the Force, something that allowed him to access the very powerful dark, but something that also allowed him gain control over the light. Anakin's focus on the Force during his master's absence helped him reach something he never thought he'd been able to find, and that was inner peace. He came to terms with his mother's death because she was gone, and it wasn't his fault. He came to terms with his feelings because he was no longer suppressing them as a Jedi. Anakin Skywalker was a good man, and he was allowing that good nature that resided within him to shine. But when Dooku returned, would he put on the mask, or would he stay true to himself? Anakin decided to test Dooku in this respect, because if Dooku responded negatively, then it would give Anakin a good reason to betray his new master, but if it was positive, then there might be a good reason to believe that Dooku was meant to lead him into a new era. When Dooku returned, he and Anakin immediately got into a spar. It was intense, but even Dooku could sense the difference within Skywalker. The two shoved their blades against each other as Dooku stopped and stood back.
What is it, Skywalker?
Why am I to believe that the darkness is more powerful than the light, when balance has given me so much more?
Because even the Sith are unwise, my apprentice.
Why do you serve them then?
It's a sacrifice, Anakin. I've given up so much, I've lost so many for the greater good.
What do you plan to do with all of this suffering?
Anakin, my boy, the Republic is a corrupt state. The Jedi are corrupt for serving it. The only way it dies is through a rapid deconstruction.
Then what are you waiting for? According to Grievous, you have the most powerful army the galaxy has ever seen. It seems like you're stalling.
A great plan takes time, Anakin. We cannot rush this. Sidious is very wise, and he is very strong. We must take our time.
Anakin looked down and sheathed his lightsaber. He had learned so much in his short stint here on Sereno, but something felt so wrong. Anakin had become twice the Force user he was at the beginning of the Clone Wars. He was a better duelist, and he had more access to Force powers he never envisioned using. But at the end of all of it, would it be worth it? The Republic held his friends, and Anakin loved his friends. His time here in Sereno had been nothing short of difficult. His allies, in Ventress and Grievous, were fine, but that's all they were. Just simply allies. Without knowledge of what the rest of the war effort was doing, how could Anakin be certain that there was any positive ending or outcome for the galaxy? Anakin wanted to do right by the galaxy, and right by the people who lived in it. And allowing a war to continuously go on didn't seem like the right way to do that, especially because Anakin was very unaware that the Sith Lord behind everything was the Chancellor. So Skywalker decided he would act against it. He missed Padme, and he even missed Obi-Wan at this point. Sure, he didn't miss the Order, but there were aspects about the Jedi that he did miss. Regardless, while Anakin was planning out his approach to possibly betraying Dooku, the Jedi were preparing for another invasion of Geonosis. Palpatine was able to prepare 3 large enough armies to head towards Geonosis and invade. He was moving Dooku away from the Outer Rim and dispatching General Grievous elsewhere in the galaxy so that the Republic could march right into Geonosis and claim victory and hopefully find Skywalker. During this time, Obi-Wan and his student were building a strong connection. Their bond was super strong, and after a really early onset of a rough patch, Ahsoka was able to get around to being the student that Obi-Wan wanted her to become. At this point in his young teaching career, Obi-Wan looked to be the tamer of the rambunctious kind, but this too didn't mean that he and Ahsoka didn't butt heads, because that was their weekly pastime. Of course, on the battlefront, Ahsoka did a fine job at receiving and relaying orders, but outside of combat, Ahsoka was, well, snippy. Obi-Wan was fine with it because he too was sarcastic and snippy enough to return that same energy. Luckily for the two of them, they weren't being deployed into battle at Geonosis. Instead, they were the first leg of the Cato Nemodia campaign. Count Dooku, on the other hand, before returning to Castle Sereno, would receive a message from his master, ordering him to execute his assassin, Asajj Ventress. When Dooku tried to retaliate, he was forced to back down and surrender the life of his student to prove his loyalty. Dooku's thoughts went back to what he had talked about with Skywalker, and maybe his student had a point. Dooku didn't want to kill Ventress because she was a powerful ally, and for the first time in 11 years he'd worked with Sidious, he truly felt like he was being played, told to make sacrifices of people he was attached to. Dooku accepted his orders, and once the comlink turned off, he rose from his seat and awaited his arrival at Castle Sereno. He was on the Solar Sailor when he got the communication, and when he arrived at Castle Sereno, he noticed a difference in the essence coming from Skywalker. When Dooku entered the castle, he was ambushed by Skywalker, who had completely destroyed the Magna Guards who stood inside the castle. This was a duel between master and apprentice. Who would come out on top was undecided. Dooku moved swiftly around, mocking every move that Skywalker made, calling him foolish, arrogant, and impatient. Anakin got angrier and angrier, throwing his hardest swings as hard as he could, only to forget that Dooku was the masterful duelist he was. Dooku sidestepped and used every technique available to him to make sure each block he used took the least amount of energy from him. Dooku watched Anakin get tired before he demanded to know why Anakin was doing this. Anakin's response was one of confusion. He wanted to go back to the life before the war. He wanted to go back to Padme, but he didn't know how to communicate it. Dooku used the Force and threw Anakin back against the wall, reminding him that he needed to be patient. If he wasn't patient, then he would throw away any ability to see positive change in the galaxy. That change was about to begin. All of his time in solitude was for something. He just didn't see it yet. Anakin looked back at Dooku with a question on his face. Dooku told Anakin that his master tried to get him to betray one of his students, and he wouldn't make any more sacrifices for the Sith Lord. So, it was time for the Republic to crumble, and in his place, a system for the galaxy. Anakin lowered his blade and looked at Dooku, nodding his head. Dooku asked if there would be any more issues between the two of them. Anakin shook his head and asked what would become of the Republic senators. Dooku told him it was a matter of rooting out the negative and corrupt ones and replacing them with viable options for a better galaxy. Anakin understood and told Dooku that he was with him no matter what. Dooku turned away from Skywalker and walked to his desk and sat down at it, turning on a hologram and sending out a communication to the held and reserve droid forces, ordering them to mount up an assault on the core worlds. Though they needed to monitor their fleet activity because if they didn't, then the Republic would catch on to what they were preparing. Dooku wanted these surprise reinforcements to catch Sidious off guard, which is exactly what they would do, even though Sidious knew that they existed. Dooku had a whole contingency plan for this, in case he ever felt the need to pull a reverse Uno card on Papa Palpatine, and killing his prize assassin was the final ticking point for Dooku. Dooku wouldn't just kill someone he saw so much potential in like Asajj. Dooku's want to have Sidious killed wasn't for growth within the ranks of the Sith to become the Sith Lord. He wanted to abolish both ancient religions of the Force and begin a new one, with a mix between dark and light, something that both he and Skywalker had grown strongly into, though Dooku told Anakin that he was here to stay on Serenno. Anakin, still not fond of his house arrest, asked why he was being kept pent up inside of the castle. Dooku told Anakin that Sidious had been trying to groom him for the last several years. Sidious was unaware of this little setup that they had themselves here at Serenno, and so Dooku wanted to make sure that Anakin was kept safe. This was mostly the truth, though the larger truth is that Dooku didn't want Anakin to have competing interests, considering that Sidious was the master manipulator. Dooku knew that to have Skywalker on his side was a necessary thing, not for using him but for keeping him sidelined. See, while Anakin may have grown in the Force, he wouldn't grow as a duelist unless he was specifically sparring with Grievous, Ventress, or himself. Dooku knew that if Sidious got his hands on Skywalker, he'd very easily become a powerful adversary, but because Anakin wasn't on the field of combat for the entire year and a half duration of the Clone Wars, there was no reason for Dooku to worry about Skywalker's potential power. He could still very easily beat him, and that was the point. Sidious had to rely on himself, because the Jedi certainly wouldn't be in his corner to help him. That was all Dooku needed, and his plan was set into action, as Skywalker stayed on Serenno believing that he was the key to everything. Dooku's fleets all moved out quickly, all significantly larger than the fleet that was in the core, which was currently situated over Coruscant. Now Dooku knew that to overthrow the Republic, he couldn't bombard Coruscant, so he'd do something different. When the fleet arrived from hyperspace, an epic battle commenced. And because the Separatists had so many more numbers, they crushed the Republic lines. Dooku's orders to the droid army were to conquer the city with as little civilization casualties as possible, while of course mercilessly killing off the clone troopers and law enforcement members who stood in their way. Republic protection droids would also be an obstacle for the Separatist forces, but B-1 droids had a significant upper hand on those clankers that patrolled the city streets of Coruscant. A group of commando droids would clear out the Senate and the Republic Executive Building and capture all the senators, while the three generals made their move on the Chancellor. The space battle over Coruscant was short-term, and the ground invasion came quickly. With the Separatists sparing citywide destruction upon their approach, it gave clone troopers a slight advantage, but the overwhelming numbers were too much even for them. Inside of the Jedi Temple, chaos began as Jedi sent as many pilots to the air as they could, while also dispatching Master Yoda, Shaak Ti, and Kit Fisto to the Chancellor's office. Inside of the Republic Executive Building, a shuttle landed. Out walked General Grievous, Asajj Ventress, and Lord Tyrannus. They marched forward towards the Chancellor's office. When they got there, commando droids had already cleared the floor with the Senate guards. Palpatine was barricaded in his office. A bunch of Senate guards made their way to the Chancellor's office to defend him, and they had nowhere to run. Dooku pointed forward, and Grievous and Asajj Ventress busted open up the doors, dispatching the several Senate guards. Sidious saw that it was Dooku who led this attack. He could almost feel it, but now it was certain. He ignited two lightsabers, and using the Force, he lifted both Grievous and Asajj from their feet and threw them against the wall, electrocuting them as Dooku stepped forward to ignite his lightsaber. Sidious grinned, though he knew this would be challenging. Dooku was an incredible duelist. He was one of the few individuals in the entire galaxy who could beat Sidious in a lightsaber duel. Usage of the Force was a much different circumstance in this situation. However, it was not something Sidious could use right now. Sidious would have to wait until the most opportune time to use the Force against Dooku. Grievous and Asajj got to their feet and ignited their lightsabers. Sidious spun forward and the duel commenced. Grievous, Asajj, Sidious, and Dooku were all accomplished duelists in their own respect. Grievous's main advantage in this predicament was his ability to use his cybernetics to dissect an opponent's attack patterns in combat. Asajj had to rely on her talent. She was very talented, but she was out of her league here. The best help for her was Grievous and Dooku, who were making Sidious fight for his life. But for an elder man, Sidious moved like a young man. He ducked and weaved, and used the Force everywhere he could, and kept his opponents off of him as best he could. Sidious threw Grievous from his feet and through the wall. Sidious knew that out of the three opponents, Grievous was the weak link, specifically because he couldn't use the Force. Asajj and Dooku used each other to keep Sidious on his heels, and it worked to perfection. When Grievous got back up and rushed into combat, Sidious threw Asajj Ventress at him, putting the two of them out of the fight for the time being. Dooku and Sidious stayed interlocked in combat as 3 Jedi came around the corner to see the 2 Sith fighting each other. Collectively, Yoda, Kit Fisto, and Shaak Ti decided to allow the Sith to fight this one out before they interjected. Why get involved when your enemies could do your job for you? The 2 Sith were so hyper-focused on each other that they didn't notice the Jedi had arrived, and then as Ventress and Grievous got back into the fight was relatively a standoff, and truthfully Grievous and Ventress were getting in the way of Dooku pulling out a victory via the lightsaber duel. Though Sidious was able to dismantle most of General Grievous and cut off Ventress's arm, pushing both of the 2 of them to either side of the room in excruciating pain. Dooku, on the other hand, having tired Sidious down enough, took full advantage of his strength in lightsaber combat. Though Sidious, being as tired as he was, took advantage of Dooku's confidence, allowing Dooku to believe that he had this in the bag by letting the Count cut his lightsaber out of his hands. Sidious was down to 1 lightsaber and pulled Dooku in before throwing Dooku off balance by slicing into his leg. Though before Sidious could claim his kill, Yoda came around the corner igniting his lightsaber at top speed. Shaak Ti and Fisto came in at the same time as well, keeping their distance while the Grand Master traded blows with Sidious. Dooku, who was laying on the ground, tapped on a little communication device on his wrist while the duel took place. Sidious growled as he tumbled backwards and was killed by Yoda. Though before celebration could begin, the Jedi were surrounded by commando droids. Dooku got to his feet and told the Jedi to surrender. The 3 Jedi turned around and used the Force on the commando droids before getting out their lightsabers to cut them down. Yoda leapt forward, throwing Dooku off his balance. Though unlike his kill of Sidious, he couldn't kill his former student. And while inside the Republic Executive Building, it looked like a victory for the Republic, it was too late for victory. Coruscant belonged to the Separatists and the droid forces marched through the Jedi Temple, and while Sindralik had plenty of time to set defenses up, there were still hundreds of deaths of the Jedi. The Temple defenses allowed several Jedi to escape the planet without being killed. The 3 Jedi Masters inside the Executive Building would be captured. Dooku, Ventress, and Grievous would return to their capital ship of the fleet during the middle of a battle that broke out as the Republic tried to defend the capital. But it was far too late. When the Separatists jumped at Coruscant, a ton of large fleets deployed around the galaxy at multiple battlefronts for the main purpose of keeping the Republic on its heels. There was no support for any of these fleets or battles, and the move single-handedly neutralized the entire Republic. It was one tactical move that Dooku had prepared for the entire war, and with the Republic forced to surrender, the Separatists would rebuild the galaxy. The clones and Jedi would be kept as prisoners as Dooku returned to Raxus to take control over everything and lead the Confederacy into complete control of the galaxy. Anakin would be allowed to leave Serenno, and while his time on Serenno may have cost him his relationship with Padme, it saved the galaxy from a rule under Palpatine. Padme would never take Anakin back after she discovered that he openly left her the way he had on Geonosis. The Jedi, on the other hand, would be forced out of the public spotlight, and Dooku would lead the Confederacy into building a relationship with the former Republic. This period of time would see lots of difficulties of power struggles, but it would lead to a more united front in the Galactic Front. And with the Jedi out of power and no real need to focus on the war, they'd be able to find and stop Darth Maul. And as for Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, Kenobi would help Tano reach a rank of Jedi Master, before joining the High Council himself. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Tiger Boy, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Darth Cheesy, Apollo, Madman Studios, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Flame Van Cease, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Hit 2,000 likes on this video. I don't know what's coming next, but it is. Part 2 of Revan's coming out later this week, and of course, episode 5 of the miniseries. Got 2 more episodes of that miniseries coming out this before the end of the month, and I'm really excited for you guys to see it. I think you guys are going to like the epic conclusion, and I hope we can do more. I would love to do more for that miniseries. Otherwise, let's talk about this story in particular. So much different. So we've done a lot of stories with Dooku in them lately, and this one being one that has Dooku as almost a main character. I really didn't want it to seem like the other ones. Like the other ones, I think one of the other ones, Dooku blew up half of Coruscant and whatnot. And I wanted this one to be a little bit different. And a lot of the motivations getting here for Dooku is based off of the Tales of the Jedi Dooku that we kind of see, where he's like, how many people have suffered because of what I've done. And he's like, the only reason he's doing it isn't because he wants to be a Sith. He's doing it because he believes that the Republic should be getting rid, that they should get rid of the Republic. And so that kind of mentality is what I want for Dooku. in this story. And there's a lot of twists and turns in this story that might be a little confusing upon first watch, and that's intentional. And the reason that it is because I kind of wanted Dooku to play mysterious in this and have him like kind of openly lie to Anakin, because Anakin's always been prophesied to be the chosen one. And so, not to diminish Anakin's role at all, but for Dooku is someone who is, well, who he is. He's not going to let Anakin ruin his plans, and he's not going to really. I don't think he takes a liking to Anakin as a young adult, as a teenager. I think Anakin's 19. I don't think he takes a liking to Anakin at 19 in any time. I just don't think he does. As a kid, maybe like we did in the What If Dooku Trained Anakin video a while back, but in this particular circumstance, no, I'm not seeing that happening, because it's, I don't know, Dooku isn't known for liking Anakin too much. And so in this scenario, I think he plays Anakin like a fool, and it's like, yeah, you're super important, and then just makes him not important, which is kind of a twist. And I know not everyone likes when I do that, but I do like focusing on other characters that aren't just Anakin sometimes. And in this way, it was kind of fun to do that, because it allowed Dooku to have a spotlight and kind of play Dooku for the brilliant individual that he was, because he's pretty smart. However, we don't really see that too much, and so having him kind of like kind of betray Palpatine the way he did was kind of fun. Also, I've had in a couple other videos lately, it's like the Clone Wars extended for a couple years. This one was fun because I got to like single-handedly close out the Clone Wars with one battle, which is kind of cool. And I think that's more accurate, honestly, in my own personal opinion. I think that's more accurate than, oh, the Clone Wars continue for another couple of years. Because the reason I say that is because like the droids had so many like backup reinforcements that they just didn't use, and so I don't know. I feel like they could really kind of spread out the entire galaxy and catch everyone off guard and be like, oh yeah, we won at the Battle of Coruscant, by the way, you know? So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video. It was a lot of fun to do. I hope you all enjoyed. Anyways, I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.